Week 10 is in the books, and a Dennis Green comment comes to mind. They are what we thought they were, and that's Penn State, and we'll talk about them later. But a little shakeup. I actually have 12 teams that are deserving in the playoffs, so we'll start with the 25 through 13. We'll start off with the teams that got knocked out of my top 25, and that was Louisiana and Pittsburgh. Louisiana kind of struggled with a team that I was hoping that they could start improving and winning games by more points. There's still only one loss, but there's other teams I think that should be in the top 25. And then Pittsburgh just got blew out by SMU, and I just don't think they're a top 25 team right now. That's why they fell all the way out of 18th. I've added week 10 the previous week so that you could easily compare this week compared to last week. Moving back, at my top 25 would be Arizona State at the 25th position. They beat Oklahoma State 42-21. I think they're one of the better Big 12 teams left, and they'll be able to prove that in the remaining 3 to 4 weeks. Depends on how their buys fell. But right now I have Arizona moving back into the top 25. At number 24, I have UNLV. They actually had a bye week, but due to Pittsburgh and Louisiana losing, I had them moving up just one spot. At 23, Colorado will stay. They had a bye week as well. I'm not going to move them around until they play their next game. At 22, Kansas State. Kansas State is like a roller coaster right now. They're up, they're down. This week they're down. They lost to Houston 19-24. Last week you can see they were ranked 14th. I had them falling a full 8 spots. Houston is, I don't think they're a middle of the road team, maybe below a middle of the road team for the Big 12. That's a huge loss for Kansas State. That puts them on the brink of not being able to make the Big 12 championship, which to me, that would be their only shot at making the playoff at the moment. At 21, we had the huge upset of Texas A&M. God, they is playing well. They undefeated in the SEC, and then they go lay an egg, no pun intended, in South Carolina, and they lost 20-44. South Carolina spanked that ass over the weekend. So I have A&M falling 8 spots to 21. Moving up to the 20th rank is Louisville. They beat Clemson 33-21. I was bouncing back. I was watching other games, and I was watching this as well. If you were just to look at the stats, it's kind of weird that Clemson lost this game. They had 31 first downs. They were 11 of 23 on third down. They were 5 for 6 on fourth down. They had 450 yards of offense. Now, granted, a lot of this was because they were playing behind. Louisville jumped on top of them. Neither team had any turnovers. Louisville jumped out on top of them in the first half. They had those 2 touchdowns. Clemson couldn't finish drives. And then in the third quarter, it was like field goal after field goal after field goal for Louisville, which would have opened the door for Clemson, but they went for it on fourth down. That was the one they didn't get. Louisville turned around and they had 4 plays for 1 yard to kick a field goal. I thought it was kind of odd that he went for it so deep in his own territory. And then the next drive, they have this long drive and they missed a field goal. It was just not Clemson's night. Louisville just took advantage of all of Clemson's mistakes, and there was only a few. But if you look at the score, that's all it takes. They lost by 12. If they could have turned that fourth down around, that would have put it 21-29. Then you would only been in one possession of scoring a touchdown and getting a 2-point conversion. But big win for Louisville, and that's why I had them moving. They were not ranked last week. That's why I have them moving all the way up to the 20th. Another team taking advantage of other teams' losses would be Washington State. I have them moving up 3 spots. They had a bye week. I know it's rare. I don't like to do that, but I thought other teams, the way they lost, should have dropped down as much as they did. Then, talking about Clemson, They fall 10 spots from 8th to 18th due to that loss to Louisville, 21 to 33. At 17, I have LSU moving up 2 spots. They were actually a bye, another team to benefit from not playing. At 16, I'm leaving Army where they're at. They beat Air Force 20 to 3. Their star quarterback did not play. They play Notre Dame in 2 weeks, and they're definitely going to need him to be healthy and able to play to have any shot at beating Notre Dame. Notre Dame played against Navy really well. So Army's really going to need their quarterback to come in, be healthy, and give them a shot. At 15, I have Ole Miss moving up 6 spots because they beat the snot out of Arkansas, the Hogs, 63 to 31. Ole Miss heads to Georgia this week, so they will have a huge test. They need to win out. They already have 2 losses, so they really can't afford to lose to Georgia if they want to have a shot at possibly getting into the SEC championship, but they're going to have to win out, and they'll need other help as well. Moving up to my 14th rank is falling back to my 14th rank is Iowa State. They fall from 6. They lost to Texas Tech in a rough one, 23 to 22. They were one of the last remaining teams in the Big 12 to be undefeated. This was another game kind of like Clemson. This game was back and forth. And at the end, Iowa State, they had to kick a few field goals. So they were down 17 to 16. So when they scored their next touchdown to go up, they were trying to make it a 7-point game. They failed on that 2-point conversion. And then Texas Tech just marched right down the field at the end of the game, scored a touchdown themselves, and they missed their 2-point conversion too. But they still won 23 to 22, same as Clemson, just didn't execute enough to win that game. And with their only top 25 win being early in the season against 21 Iowa, which was a 2019 win, I didn't have them in the playoff yet, so I had them falling back to that 14th position. So the last remaining spot would be the 13th ranked Penn State. They fall a staggering 10 spots from the 3 in the nation to 13th. Why do I have them falling out of the playoff? Because what I saw, they're not a playoff team. I don't care what anybody says. Yeah, they're undefeated. Who do they beat? They haven't beat nobody. And then just like every year, and I mentioned this last week, they haven't beat Ohio State in 7 years. Well, everybody was saying, hey, this should be the team to do it. Ohio State's been kind of struggling, even though they're a talented team. And they go out there, and they can't score a single offensive touchdown. They even got a 10-point lead in the beginning. They had the pick 6 to go up 10-0. But Ohio State came back, won it kind of convincingly. I don't think the 2013 score really shows how much Ohio State was dominating this game. Penn State couldn't do anything on offense. It's just like every year it's the same thing. They're overrated. And this is why I kept worrying about putting them so high. They only have 2 wins against winning teams. Now, one of them was a top 25 game. Illinois was 19th when they beat them 21-7, and Illinois was undefeated. So we can't take that away. But their only other team that they've beat with a winning record is Wisconsin, and they're only a game over 500. But at this moment, the teams I put in the top 12, I think are just more dynamic, and I rather see them play in the playoff than this anemic offense. I know Ohio State's defense is good, but so are these other teams as well. And I just can't put them in my playoff right now. And that concludes my 25 through 13. Now we're going to get into the playoff teams 1 through 12. At number 12, I have the SMU Mustangs coming off their huge defeat of the undefeated number 18th Pittsburgh Panthers, 48-25. Last week, they were at number 20th. Their AP rank currently is 13th. The player of the game this weekend is their running back, Brashard Smith, had 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their next 3 games will be Boston College at Virginia. Then they'll host Cal. Their offensive ranking is 23rd, defense 45th. That strength of schedule, 71st. They'll probably need to work on that one just a little bit. But I moved them up in the playoff because I think they're a good team. They actually beat Louisville. They have 2 top 25 wins now. They beat 22 Louisville 34-27. They barely beat Duke 28-27, but they've beat a lot of other good teams. Scored a lot of points on them. Can't count Florida State or Stanford, but they did beat TCU. And their only loss right now, they're 8-1. They lost to BYU 18-15, only by a field goal, and they're one of the top 10 teams right now. So SMU is looking pretty good, having a shot of maybe, now that Clemson lost, they have a shot of making that playoff game against Miami. And their schedule is easy enough, just like Miami, to hopefully have a shot to get into that title game. But right now, they don't even need it. I would still have them in my playoff. Moving into my 11th rank from 17 is Alabama. Freaking AP. I did this before the AP, before the NFL game started. I just didn't get to record yesterday. But their AP rank is 11-2. They had a bye this week. Their next game, they have a huge game. They actually go to LSU. So they'll play my 17th ranked LSU this week. Then they'll have a cupcake with Mercer. And then, kind of a cupcake right now, they'll go to Oklahoma in 3 weeks. Their offensive ranking has been dropping a pretty good bit. Their defensive ranking has stayed pretty much the same. Their strength of schedule is going to stay in that top 20 just because it's SEC, especially with them playing LSU. Outside of LSU, they don't play any more top 25 teams. With their 2 top 25 wins, the big one against Georgia, the other one against Mizzou, but their losses to Tennessee and Vandy might knock them out of the SEC championship. But if they beat LSU, that's 3 top 25 wins, and that gives them a great shot of making the playoff. Moving up to number 10 for me is Boise State. Their previous 15th. Their AP rank is 12th. They defeated San Diego State Friday night 56-24. Their player of the game was Maddox Madsen, their quarterback, 307 yards with 4 touchdowns. They've been riding the back of the Heisman hopeful Genty, their running back, who had another 100 yards games. But like I've been saying, he had 33 carries again. They're using this kid so much that workload is heavy every week. They're going to have to slow down that workload a little bit in their last 4 games. And one of their biggest things is they have no wins against a top 25 team. But they have a really good loss. I mean, their only loss is to Oregon, and it was 37-34. At the time, they're like, man, Oregon's really struggling. Maybe it's just Boise State is that good. Nobody's played Oregon as well, really, outside of Ohio State. They don't necessarily need a top 25 win because the power of 4 or 5 will have a shot at the playoff. But if they win out for the rest of the season, I think they're going to stay in this top 12 because other teams play more difficult schedules. So they'll have a really good shot of making an automatic bid in actually getting that spot. They won't fall to 12th. They'll get the rank that they fall in. Right now it would be 12th, but for me it would be 10. But that's currently where I have Boise State falling in at the 10th rank. Moving in the top 10 for me at number 9 is the Hoosiers of Indiana. They beat Michigan State 47-10. They were at number 12 for me. Their current AP rank is 8th. Their player of the game coming back was Curtis Rourke. He's their quarterback, 263 yards with 4 TDs. Next 3 games, they have Michigan. Then their big game, they go to Ohio State. And then they play Purdue. These rankings here, they're just bloated. If we'll start with the strength of schedule, it's 103rd. I think that's a good reason why those rankings are so high, with an offensive ranking of third and defensive ranking of eighth. We really won't find out. Michigan's just not a good team this year. We'll find out in 2 weeks when they go to Ohio State. Both of them, Ohio State will need that win just as much as Indiana. That could, if Ohio State wins that game, that could potentially set up a rematch with Ohio State and Oregon in the Big 12 championship. But if Indiana wins, they would probably go on to play Oregon, and Ohio State would need to find a way to get into the 12-team playoff towards the back end. I still think they're a good enough team. I still think Ohio State can lose this game and still make the playoff in 2 weeks against Indiana. But we'll see when we get there. But for right now, I have Indiana at 9. Moving on to my 8th ranked team, that's the Tennessee Volunteers. They beat Kentucky 28-18. Their player of the game was Miles Kitselman. Maybe I'm not saying his last name right, but he's a tight end. He had 6 catches for 97 yards and a touchdown. Their next 3 games is Mississippi State, then the big one. In 2 weeks, they go to Georgia to play the Bulldogs, and then they have UTEP. Now, their offense and defensive rankings are a little more true. It's kind of surprising how much their offense has been struggling for them to still be 9th in the nation. But those first 3 games that they played were just lights out. Their strength of schedule right now is 33rd. That should go up because after UTEP, they have to play Vanderbilt. So they still have 2 top 25 games left or remaining. Now, they're one of the few teams. They have 3 top 25 wins. 2 of them, though, one was when NC State was 24th in the nation, and then Oklahoma, which was 15. Those 2 are no longer in the top 25. Neither one of them will be back in the top 25. And then, of course, they have the big win against Alabama. Tennessee controls their own destiny in the SEC. If they find a way to beat Georgia, they can make the SEC championship as long as they beat Vanderbilt. There's 5 teams with only 1 loss in the SEC. And then there's 4 more teams with only 2 losses. So the SEC is pretty much still wide open considering how many games each of them have to play against each other. So it should be interesting to kind of see where Tennessee falls, but they really need to get that win against Georgia to have a good shot. They could still lose against Georgia, beat Vanderbilt, and make the playoff, but to me, beating Georgia would cement their position to possibly getting into the SEC championship game and definitely the playoff. Moving to my 7th rank is Notre Dame. They move up 3 spots for me from 10. They're currently AP is 10. I know they had a bye week, but their resume is holding up against some of the other teams in the top 10. They beat number 20 Texas A&M 23-13 earlier in the season. Texas A&M is still at 21 for me. They beat Louisville, 15th ranked, 31-24. Louisville's back in the top 25 at 20. And then they beat Navy 51-14. The biggest thing for them that is still hanging over their head is, of course, that Northern Illinois loss. Northern Illinois is now 4-4 at the moment, and that's kind of hanging over their head. And I think that's why the AP keeps dropping them a little bit. But I think the 2 wins against Texas A&M and Louisville hold up a lot better. I'd put those wins over NC State and Oklahoma for Tennessee because neither of those 2 teams are ranked anymore, and the 2 teams they have beat are still ranked. So that means a lot. They did have a bye week, of course, this week. They got Florida State, which everybody knows that story. Virginia's not good. And then they'll play 16th ranked Army. And I'm still not sure about Army. I would love to see Army win that game just because I love to pull for the underdog and to have a military academy up into the rankings and have a shot at even making the playoff. But like I said earlier, with Army, they've got to get Bryson Daly back. He has to come back, I think, for them to have a shot at beating Notre Dame and staying at least in the top 25. If they beat Notre Dame, they could creep up in the top 15 and maybe hang around there depending on how they play Navy. You see their rankings there. That pretty much is a decent rankings. Strength of schedule is kind of a little above average. I mean, below average, I should say. But Notre Dame is one of those teams, I don't know, it's kind of hard to figure out. With that Northern Illinois loss, I mean, they'd be a top 5 team for sure because they beat 3 top 25. Now, after Army, the one game that could still give Notre Dame issues is USC. USC always plays them very well, and they have to go out to Southern California to play that game. I know USC has, I think they're 4-5 now. They're not looking that good, but that team is got enough talent that they could upset Notre Dame at the end of the season. So really, Army USC is kind of their playoff games to get into the playoff. If they win those, they're definitely in. Moving up to number 6 for me is the Texas Longhorns. They were ninth. Their AP rank is 5th. They had a bye week. They actually play Florida this week. Then they have Arkansas. And then they have Kentucky. The last game is the big one. They play Texas A&M. Their offensive ranking is 16th. They have that number 1 defense currently. And their strength of schedule is 54th. Not much to talk about this week. We're really just waiting for that last game. I think they should play Florida. Florida should play them well, but I still think Texas will win that game. I don't think Arkansas or Kentucky is going to be able to beat this team, so I think they will win out, and then Texas A&M is going to have to play better than what they did against South Carolina. That matchup could determine on who goes to the SEC championship, especially if Texas wins out and then they won't beat Texas A&M. They have a really good shot of getting into that championship game. But that's all I have for Texas this week. I know this is going to be strange, but Miami is my 5th ranked team now. They fall from my number 2. Their AP rank is 6th. They defeated Duke 53-31. So the main reason that I moved them is because they have 0 top 25 wins. Now, Louisville, they did beat them, and they have crept back into the top 25, but they didn't beat them at the time they were ranked. So they have no top 25 wins right now. So after reevaluating all the teams, I'm like, with that schedule that they have, I just couldn't leave them at number 2. It just didn't make any sense. And if you look at their next 3 games, they have Georgia Tech. We all know last year, I keep saying we all know, most of us probably know that last year Miami just had to kneel the ball down and they'd beat Georgia Tech. Well, they didn't. They ran a play, stopped the clock. Then Georgia Tech had this big play, went down and scored, and upset Miami last year. Then they have Wake Forest. Syracuse is better this year, but the way this offense is playing and they're riding the back of Cam Ward, I just don't see them having any problems with those 3 teams. Going back, I want to talk about the player of the game real quick. Xavier Restrepo, he's a wide receiver. He had 146 yards with 3 TDs. Now look at this. He becomes the all-time receiving TD leader at the University of Miami. That shows you what this kid has done, because there has been quite the talent to come through Miami from the wide receiver standpoint. So props to Xavier. That is very, very impressive. And then going back to their Heisman candidate that's leading this team, and another reason Restrepo was getting so many receiving TDs, Cam has this team as the number 1 offensive ranking in the nation. Their defense is still 19th. And their strength of schedule, even though I know I moved them back, it's 46, which is pretty good considering they hadn't played a ton of top 25 teams. But I had to pull them back. I just didn't think that they were the number 2 team in the country anymore. And that's why I have them falling into the fifth rank. Okay, falling into my fourth ranking, moving up from the seventh is Ohio State. Their current AP is third. They defeated number three Penn State 20-13. Their player of the game again is Cody Simon. He's a linebacker, 10 tackles and a sack. And you're like, hey, they just beat the number three team. How did they not move up to the third position? Because Penn State sucks. And that is their only top 25 win. I know it's a top 5 win, but does anybody really think Penn State is a top 5 team or even a top 10 team? I don't think so. That's why I have them at 13th. I don't even have them in the playoff. They never can find offense in the big games. Their defense always plays pretty good. They didn't score a single touchdown. Is that on Ohio State or is that on that horrible offense that can never show up on big games? We don't know. But I actually thought that I said Ohio State would win by 14. I think they had plenty of opportunities to fumble into the end zone, but then again they got the interception back with Penn State at the end of the half. I could talk about that they probably have one of the best losses, like I talked about Boise State earlier. They lost to Oregon, so did Ohio State. The number one team in the country is Oregon. Ohio State only lost by 1 point. I still think that counts, but I can't put them at number 3 right now. I still think they are a good team, and I'll be honest with you. If they can get that offense rolling, be careful with this team going into the playoff because they could do a lot of damage getting into the playoff if they get that offense rolling. The biggest thing is Howard. If they had any other quarterback, if they had just a little better of a quarterback, this team would be very difficult to beat, especially with those two bruising running backs that they have. So they can impress their resume coming up in 3 weeks against Indiana. That's going to be their ticket to stay at a shot of going to the Big Ten championship, winning it, getting a bye, or hanging in to play in the playoff. I honestly think they could still lose that game to Indiana and still make the playoff. I think their roster is good enough to stay in that. Just like Alabama, I'm putting Alabama in it because they are a good team. Their roster holds up against others. I know they have 2 losses, but they can win into the playoff as well. That's why we play. We got 4 weeks left for them to prove that they belong into the playoff, and they're definitely going to make the playoff. I would say they're at like a 95% chance of making the playoff, even if they lose to Indiana. The only way is if they get destroyed by Indiana. I'll be honest, they still might make it, just because other teams might have more than 2 losses. Everyone knows how much I hate Ohio State, but this isn't bias. This is just looking at their schedule and so forth. I'm still giving them a lot of props. I still think they could get beat by Indiana and make the playoff. Moving to my third position is BYU. They move up 1 spot. They're currently ranked 9th. They did have a bye this week. Their next 3 games are Utah, Kansas, my 25th, Arizona State. Their offensive rankings are 49th, defense is 38th, and then strength of schedule is 61st. They do have 2 top 25, well, 1 top 25 win against Kansas State. They beat them 38-9, and then they beat SMU, who was not ranked at the time, but SMU is now in the playoff for me. They beat them 18-15. The reason I have them moving up ahead of Ohio State because they have more quality wins than Ohio State currently has, and they're undefeated. They have not lost a game. Let's look at these next 3 games. They have Utah. So Cam Rising is supposed to have surgery this week. That pretty much ends it for Utah. I don't think they have a shot. Now, Kansas has been playing a lot better recently. And then they have my team that just moved back in the top 25, Arizona State. So Kansas and Arizona State could pose a problem. Look, Houston just beat Kansas State, that is the last game that I don't show. That's their last game of the season. So they have a few pieces of competition left. They have the easiest road to the Big 12 championship because they have 0 losses in the conference so far. Now with Iowa State losing, Iowa State's going to be battling Colorado and Kansas State and possibly Arizona State to get into that championship game. So the Big 12 is still wide open. There's still 4 or 5 teams. And, God, I mean, if Iowa State and Colorado lose one more game, then you can put Texas Tech, Cincinnati back into the fold and see kind of where that falls. But with all that being said, I mean, they don't really need another quality win, so to speak, because they could just win the Big 12 championship, and they're automatically in. So the resume and the strength of schedule, that's only going to help if you lose that Big 12 championship. So if they win in and say they play Colorado and Colorado upset them and they got the bye, then they would need that so that they could stay in the playoff. But to me, if they go into the into the Big 12 championship undefeated and they lose, they're probably still going to get in. Okay, enough about BYU. Let's move on to the the number 2 team in the nation is the Georgia Bulldogs. They were number 5. I have them moving up. That matches their AP rank. They defeated Florida 34-20. Their player of the game was Nate Frazier, running back, had 82 yards and a touchdown. I thought it was big that he came in after Etienne got hurt. Their next 3 games are 2 huge games coming up. They have to travel to Ole Miss, and then they get Tennessee at home. They're kind of in a spot in the SEC. Like I said earlier, there's 5 one-loss teams in that conference right now. That's their conference record, 5 one-loss within the conference. So they need to win out. That's a tough schedule. Then they got Georgia Tech, who is their rival. That could still possibly give them a headache because they seem to play down to their competition after a big game, and that's understandable. And then if we look at their national rankings, they're 38th in offense, 12th in defense. That defense keeps moving up because it's playing so well. And then they have the number 1 strength of schedule, which I think Florida will end up passing them at one point because I think they have a tougher. Well, no, they play Florida State last. So it might be close on who remains in that number 1 strength of schedule ranking. I mean, with Georgia playing a 15 and an 8 coming up, they might have a chance of locking it down before the last game anyway. But that's where Georgia stands. I have them at number 2. After reevaluating again, the reason I moved them up was they have that win against Clemson, against 14th ranked Clemson at the time. They beat them 34-3, and then the big win against number 1 Texas. But they still have that loss against Alabama. But at least Alabama was 4th at the time. They're 11th for me now, and they made such a huge comeback. So their quality of wins just matched up more than Miami, Ohio State, or BYU. And I have Georgia moving up to number 2. Remaining the number 1 team in the nation is Oregon Ducks. I put the big O behind their name because they remain undefeated, 0 losses. They're 1-1, my rank, AP rank. They defeated Michigan pretty handily, 38-17. Even though, come on, Dan Lanning, man, I really like you, but there was no reason to get that last touchdown towards the end of the game. You already had the game well in hand. You already had a 2-touchdown lead. Anyway, player of the game is Jordan James, our running back, had 117 yards with a touchdown. Their next 3 games, they should have no issues. Maryland, Wisconsin, Washington might. That should be an interesting game. They lost to them twice last year. That's when Washington went to the national championship. Rankings are pretty solid, 11-11. And then their strength of schedule is 45th. Oregon's definitely in the driver's seat. Their quality wins. Beat number 2 Ohio State 32-31. They beat number 20th Illinois 38-9. They were 20th at the time. Even though they wasn't ranked at the time, they beat Boise State 37-34. Boise State's now my number 10. Very high quality wins. Their last 3 games, they have no teams that are in the top 25, but they should be able to easily go into the Big Ten championship. And I think it will come down to who wins the Indiana-Ohio State game. The winner of that game will probably play Oregon, and I think both of those teams that are in that championship game will remain and play into the playoff. So there it is. That's my top 12. Let's get to the playoff bracket. Starting on the bracket, top left-hand corner, we have the number 1 team in the nation, Oregon, as the 1 seed. The 8 seed would be Tennessee playing the 9 seed Indiana. The 12 seed would now be SMU versus the 5 seed Ohio State. Because Boise State is ranked, they would fall into a seed. Miami would get the bye for the ACC championship at number 4. Moving in the top right-hand corner, we have BYU as the 3 seed. Alabama would be the 11 seed playing Texas, the 6 seed. Then Boise State would fall in the 10 seed, and they would play Notre Dame, the 7th seed. And then finishing up the bracket, we would have Georgia winning the SEC as the 2 seed. And there's your bracket, and man, look at those games. Those would be a lot of fun. Could you imagine SMU's high-flying offense against that Ohio State defense in Alabama and Texas? That would be fun. Just a lot of fun games. And whoever wins playing the other bye teams. God, I can't wait until this playoff. It's going to be so much fun. Moving on to the Heisman Watch. Just a few changes in my 4 through 7. Starting at 7, I still have Nick Nash, the wide receiver of San Jose. Moving in my top 7, I have Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback for Oregon, at number 6. Then at number 5, I have Jay Higgins. Man, he's this impressive linebacker out of Iowa. The reason I have him moving up is he's 4th in the nation in tackles, and he also has 3 interceptions and 2 forced fumbles. So I have him moving up in place of the kid from Navy. And then I still have the leading tackler in the nation, Sean Dolick, in that 4th spot just outside of going to New York. Moving on to my top 3, I'm not going to move them this week. Cam Ward had a great game against their win against Duke. Genty ran the ball 33 times. They beat San Diego State. He helped there. Travis Hunter actually had a bye, but right now this is where I have them. I still think Travis Hunter should win the Heisman unless something happens. I would have Genty 2, Ward 3. There's still 3 to 4 weeks remaining, and these could flip-flop, but at this point, I don't see anyone coming in unless maybe Gabriel or somebody just blew up all the way through the Big Ten championship. But right now, I just don't see that. I think these 3 are the best in the country, and they keep showing that. Now, I actually wish, I talked about this earlier, I wish they would lighten the load for him so that he'll be ready for the playoff to help him maybe win a game. But that is my Heisman Watch for Week 11. So as always, thank you for listening to Spider Red. Go watch a football game with someone later.